turn it over to the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Amy, I think you're up.
So I'm Amy Wilkinson. I'm a public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and I split my time up at Harvard in the Center for Business and Government. I have spent the last 3 years looking at this question of who are high-impact entrepreneurs. I'm writing a book. The title is High Impact: How Entrepreneurs Lead on the Front Lines of the Future. And the hypothesis that I've got is that every single person, regardless of where you plug in, really has to be an entrepreneur now. You need to know how to manage speed. You need to know how to spot an opportunity that other people don't see. You need to iterate ideas forward. You need to network minds in non-traditional ways in order to solve problems that are very, very complex. And you need to unleash generosity in a networked world. And so that's sort of the question that I've been looking at. It's more on the people side. And so these guys asked me to introduce a little bit about who are the people that are in this book, or who are the people that lead the entrepreneurship movement. As a tribute to Steve Jobs, we all know that we lost Steve Jobs. On my iPhone, I will read you a quote from his Think Differently campaign that I posted on Facebook. So there's a tribute to Mark Zuckerberg, right? Quote is, here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. That is the Apple slogan for Think Differently. And so that's the kind of research that I've been looking at, is what are the mindsets and skill sets of those people? How do they really make these high-scale, high-impact endeavors happen? But I'll shift the commentary a little bit, since we're on the Hill, to what can policy do to support this kind of person? And the first thing is the visas. So I'll actually mirror a lot of what the Kauffman Foundation has put forward in maybe a little bit more anecdotal way. A little bit about my background as well. I spent 7 years at Stanford, and I moved from Silicon Valley into Washington, D.C. And so a lot of the people I was in school with, a lot of my friends are sort of in this leading revolution of starting up companies like eBay or Google or Facebook or like that. And so it's real deal people. It's not people that are far, far away and on TV and that you read about in magazines. It's really people like are in this room. You guys could start up the next revolution if you just got the right technology partner, in many cases, to partner up with you. So what do those kind of people need? One thing that I hear all the time in Silicon Valley is the need for immigrant visas. It is something that we hear about on the Hill as well, but 30 to 40% of the founders of the technology companies in the Valley are foreign-born. So that includes Google, it includes eBay, it includes Intel. If you want to look outside of tech, and it's still in San Francisco, it's Levi Strauss, right? Levi's jeans, it's not tech. We see lots and lots of examples of needing foreign talent. We tend to think that it's Asian talent, right? Whether it's Chinese or Indian, it can also be Eastern European. It can be coming from absolutely anywhere in the world. But when people come to Stanford University or Berkeley or any one of our universities, we would really like them to stay, right? If they have great ideas and they would like to employ U.S. workers, it's really hard to see them go because their H-1B visa status or other things when they graduate, other problems when they try to start companies or be employed by companies mean that we simply lose them and they go home. And so I'm not sure how many of you have been into Shanghai recently, Guangzhou. If you've been traveling abroad, you see these same people going home, and it really is not good for the United States. We would like to keep them here. And so awarding green cards, you have plenty of CEOs in the Valley saying staple a green card to the back of the diploma of anybody who's got a STEM degree. Just please, give a green card, figure out this immigration issue so that we can keep a lot of the leading entrepreneurs in the United States. So that's sort of point one. Point two, advance entrepreneurship education. So it's a growing trend in universities to start having students in entrepreneurship curriculum. It is a generational thing. If you look at Gen Y, 70% of Gen Y says that they will be serial entrepreneurs. It's It's pretty amazing. 40% of people age 18 to 24 have an interest in starting a business. So we'd like to figure out how to help them do that, right? And that would be things like NIFTY, the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship. That's a high school level curriculum. The MIT Venture Mentor Program at the university level is a really good model to look at. Something called FIRST Robotics. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of FIRST, but it's absolutely fantastic. I see we have a fan in the audience. It's really great. I know Kent actually is a judge for some of the robotics competitions. It's really a powerful way to get kids interested in building robots, so it's math and science.
Can I interject something?
Yeah.
Google FIRST Robotics Morgan Freeman. Okay?
Right.
And YouTube. Just look at the video, share it with people. Just
Will I am.
And Will I am too. Well, but I think Morgan Freeman is actually better.
You're talking to a different guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 3-minute YouTube spot on FIRST Robotics. It's absolutely fantastic. And I like one of the quotes of Dean Kamen. He's one of the social entrepreneurs. He's an inventor. He's a social entrepreneur in my book. And he says that this is the sport in which every single human can go pro, right? I mean, it's a sports analogy of robots playing sports, but it's something if you really educate your mind, it's something that for the whole rest of your life you can be a pro at your profession. So advancing entrepreneurship education. The third point that I'll make is easing corporate governance on small companies. So this is the Sarbanes-Oxley backlash, where small startups and hopefully these high potential startups really do struggle with the onerous requirements. And into the IPO markets, we haven't seen, obviously the markets haven't been that great. We haven't seen a lot of IPOs issued. That means, in effect, companies like YouTube sell to Google, because that's an exit strategy that's an easier exit strategy. That's what most of these high potential, high growth companies are going to look for. That means in many cases they will not be as big as they might have been on their own. So if you look back at Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg was absolutely determined to go on his own. We see this as a bigger and bigger and bigger phenomenon. But for others like YouTube, they looked for an exit and they went into an exit into Google. And that is the predominant thing that we're seeing, especially given the economic times. So easing corporate governance requirements would help potentially scale these high potential or high growth ventures forward. Fourth, increasing collaboration among universities, government, and business. So this is the ecosystems argument. And you definitely see it in Silicon Valley. And for the United States, my big hope is that we see it elsewhere too. Like, let's try to get it into Ohio. Let's try to have a Silicon Valley in Virginia. I mean, let's move this kind of phenomenon around. It's hard to replicate. And we see the Chinese trying very, very hard to build Silicon Valleys in China. I think that we should be looking at that as, especially on the Hill and all of you that represent different congressional districts and different parts of the country, as something that we should be trying to do. One thing to do that is what was mentioned, the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980 makes it very difficult for academics to commercialize research except within their own university. And so part of the dynamic of Silicon Valley is you do have Stanford and Berkeley there, but you also have all of these businesses and all of these other people that are moving around that are incubating ideas together. I mean, this is Steve Jobs. He, was at Xerox PARC basically copying ideas, and that was the beginning of Apple. He's sleuthing around, looking at what Xerox is doing, and then finding some really great engineers and putting together teams and coming up with, that was the first wave of the Apple technologies. But in order to create the synergies across sectors, I think we need to be thinking about building ecosystems. And one of the real practical things to do is look at commercializing university technologies in different ways. And then the final point that I'll make is about supporting women. Obviously, near and dear to my heart, we don't see that many women in high-scale, high-impact entrepreneurship. And there are some reasons for that. One is that they really aren't funded to the same degree. This is a little bit of the old boys network. 80% of the venture capitalists are men. It's hard to be introduced in business schools. I'm a Stanford MBA. My class had 40% women. It's the largest percentage of women in any business school class. The numbers have unfortunately gone down. So we're back down to like 25 or 27% at Stanford Business School. And so for women, Kaufman has a new report out on this. It's kind of now a trendy thing to be talking about as an undervalued asset class. Can we invest in women-owned businesses and can we scale them up at a much faster and higher rate? So just a couple numbers on that. Only 10% of angel investments are made in women-owned companies, and less than 5% of venture-backed funding is going into women-backed companies. Now, there are different sides of the coin on this. You can also say women are not coming up with the greatest concepts, right? You can think different reasons for why that's happening. But in terms of performance, there's a new white paper out in Silicon Valley that's pretty interesting, saying that women do more with less. They tend to get 1/3 less capital invested in the businesses, and they have 12% higher return on invested capital. So this is an asset class category. As a former banker, I mean, I'll tell you, that's like a pretty interesting investment category if you can fund those kinds of businesses. And Babson College has a stat out that says if women entrepreneurs in the United States started with the same capital as men, they'd add a whopping 6 million jobs to the economy in 5 years. And they do that 2 million jobs in the first year alone. So it's something to think about in terms of an asset class or a group of people that we could also be trying to foster. There's some ways to do that. There are increasing numbers of women's organizations. ASTI is one. Springboard is one. You see them in Silicon Valley. You see them in New York. In terms of policy, ideas for this is bolstering the Small Business Administration, women-owned businesses offices that are around the country. And I guess as a final point, I'll just say managing through volatility, there's really no better group of people to manage the unknown. So as we see the markets go up and down and we see a lot of things that feel out of control, that's what an entrepreneur is managing all of the time. So if you think back to Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or Sergey Brin or Larry Page, they were not certainties to be successful. If you haven't watched the Steve Jobs 2005 commencement address at Stanford, definitely watch that on YouTube or pick up the text of it. He was fired from his own company, which most people don't realize. But at one point in time, he wasn't that great of a manager. He was fired. He left, and he went and apologized to everybody in Silicon Valley for being a failure, which is kind of amazing. He went to Hewlett and Packard and his other mentors and said he was so embarrassed he thought he needed to leave the valley. I've heard him talk about potentially moving to Arizona because it was far away. And then he thought he was absolutely in love with what he did. He was in love with building technologies. So even though he was rejected, he was in love. And he would go back to Apple, I think it's 11 years later, when they asked him to come back. And so it's one of these things where entrepreneurs don't really know what's going to happen. It's not always a smooth ride. And yet they find a way to be resilient. They find a way to come back. They find a way to improvise. And so as a group of people, especially in a difficult economic time, they not only create jobs, which the Kauffman Foundation does a great job at showing how they create jobs, they also are people that can manage through volatility in ways that a lot of the rest of us aren't necessarily comfortable with. And as a final point in terms of looking forward, the top 10 in-demand jobs of 2010 didn't exist in 2004. And so I always like to tell people that, we don't know what the next wave of entrepreneurship really looks like, but we're sure it's coming fast, and we're sure that we want to be a part of it.